He was rich, powerful, feared in boardrooms. But what he saw in the hands of a little girl outside a shelter made him question everything he believed about fate, family, and forgiveness. Some bonds can never truly be broken. Some promises find their way back to us, even when we've spent decades trying to forget them. Before we begin, do you think people deserve second chances? Not just small ones, but the life-altering kind that rewrite everything you thought you knew? Take a moment and tell me in the comments. I'm reading every single one. This is a story about fate's long game, about how a forgotten promise can find its way back to you decades later, about how the universe sometimes conspires to give us exactly what we need, even when we think we need nothing at all. Jonathan Vale wasn't always distant. Once, he had been a boy with dreams like any other. But life has a way of hardening softness, of turning hope into pragmatism, and eventually into something resembling careful detachment. Even as a child in the group home, there had been moments when he felt strangely out of step with time, as if he were merely waiting for something important to happen. The other children played, Jonathan planned. They lived day to day. He sketched futures with mathematical precision, as if he somehow knew that patience would eventually be rewarded. By 45, Jonathan was one of the richest men in the city. His investment firm occupied the top 12 floors of a gleaming tower downtown, a structure he had commissioned himself, a monument to success that seemed to touch the clouds. People called it the Vale, though never to his face. To his face, they called him Sir or Mr. Vale, and they rarely maintained eye contact for long. There was something in his gaze that made people uncomfortable. Not cruelty, exactly. Something more like absence. As if some vital human component had been systematically removed, year by year, deal by deal. His personal life was as meticulously ordered as his financial portfolio. A penthouse apartment where nothing was ever out of place. Clothes tailored to mathematical precision. Relationships that lasted exactly as long as they served a purpose. Jonathan had been an orphan once. This was not something he discussed, not something that appeared in the carefully curated profiles business magazines wrote about him. But the group home where he'd spent his childhood had shaped him in ways even he couldn't fully comprehend. It had taught him that attachments were dangerous, that self-reliance was the only reliable currency. In boardrooms, his measured silence carried more weight than others' passionate arguments. He could reshape proposals with just a thoughtful glance or a quietly raised question. Competitors were wary of him. Colleagues respected but rarely connected with him on a personal level. People still talked about how he had restructured Carson Industries, leading to significant layoffs because the financial projections demanded it. Business isn't personal, he would say, though sometimes, in quiet moments alone in his office, he wondered if that was entirely true. On this particular December evening, Jonathan attended the annual Children's Future Charity Gala. He didn't particularly enjoy these events, but appearances mattered, and his PR team insisted. The Vale Foundation made substantial donations to causes that photographed well, and Jonathan understood the value of cultivating the right image. He had perfected the art of invisibility in plain sight, making necessary appearances while revealing nothing. 2 hours of calculated charm, 3 glasses of untouched champagne, and 1 substantial check later, he was done. Mission accomplished. Good press secured. The night air was biting when he stepped out of the hotel ballroom. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the shoulders of his immaculate wool coat. His driver was 3 minutes late, an anomaly Jonathan noted with mild irritation. He stood apart from the lingering crowds, checking his watch. That's when he noticed the shelter across the street. It wasn't much to look at, a weathered brick building with a faded sign that read, Harbor Light Family Shelter. Through its windows, he could see a Christmas tree, sparsely decorated. He wondered briefly about the tax benefits of an end-of-year donation before dismissing the thought. Too small to be worth the paperwork. Jonathan didn't see the girl approach. She seemed to materialize beside him, small and quiet as a shadow. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely audible above the street noise. He nearly brushed her aside. Children rarely figured into his daily calculations. But something in her steady gaze made him pause. She was exactly 8 years old, bundled in a coat several sizes too large, with patches at the elbows. Dark hair fell in uneven waves around a serious face that held an uncanny familiar quality he couldn't immediately place. "My mom told me to give this to you," she continued, holding out a folded, crinkled piece of paper. "She said you'd remember." Jonathan glanced around, looking for an adult who might belong to this child. Seeing no one, he reluctantly took the paper between 2 gloved fingers. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else," he said dismissively. The girl shook her head with strange certainty. No. Mom said to find the man in the black coat coming out of the fancy party. She said to say her name is Amelia and that you'd know when you saw what's inside. Amelia. The name landed like a physical blow. Jonathan hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over 25 years. Couldn't have heard it. It belonged to another life, another version of himself. His driver pulled up to the curb, but Jonathan waved him off. With hesitant fingers, he unfolded the paper and froze. It was a crayon drawing. Childish, simple. A man, a woman, and a little girl, all holding hands under a bright yellow sun. In the corner, written in shaky letters, me and my future daughter, Lena. And underneath it was his own childhood signature, Johnny Vale, age 6. He dropped to the bench beside him, eyes wide, heart racing. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He had drawn this when he was 6 years old, during his 3rd year at Westbrook Children's Home. He and Amelia had been inseparable then, 2 orphans against the world, making plans for futures they could barely imagine. But how? How did this girl have it? And why was her name Lena? "Where is your mother?" he managed to ask, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. The girl, Lena, pointed to the shelter across the street. "She's inside. She's been sick for a while. That's why we had to come here." There was no self-pity in her voice, just the matter-of-fact acceptance children sometimes have of difficult circumstances. Jonathan stood, still clutching the drawing. "Take me to her." Inside the Harbor Light shelter, the world was different. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and something cooking, a thick stew, perhaps. People sat at communal tables, some reading, others talking quietly. A few glanced up at Jonathan's entrance, taking in his expensive coat and out-of-place demeanor before returning to their own concerns. Jonathan felt exposed here, stripped of the armor his wealth usually provided. He followed Lena through a corridor lined with family photos, residents past and present, he assumed. They reached a small office where a woman in her 40s looked up from paperwork. "This is Miss Patricia," Lena explained. "She runs everything." Patricia studied Jonathan with immediate skepticism. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Amelia," Jonathan said, surprising himself with how easily the name came to his lips after all these years. "Amelia. I don't know her last name now. We were in Westbrook Children's Home together." Understanding dawned in Patricia's eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like sadness. "You're Jonathan," she said softly. "She said you might come." The way she said it made Jonathan's heart constrict. "Where is she? I need to speak with her." Patricia glanced at Lena, then back to Jonathan. "Lena, honey, why don't you go help Mrs. Garcia in the kitchen for a few minutes?" Lena looked between the adults with the perceptiveness children often possess when adults are hiding something. "Is this about Mom?" "Just for a few minutes," Patricia repeated gently. After Lena reluctantly departed, Patricia gestured for Jonathan to sit. He remained standing. "Amelia passed away 3 days ago," she said quietly. "Pneumonia, complicated by an underlying condition. She'd been fighting it for months." Jonathan felt the words like physical blows. Amelia, dead. The last connection to his childhood, gone before he even knew she had been found. "She came to us about 6 months ago," Patricia continued. "She knew she was sick. Terminal. Her last wish was for Lena to find you. She was convinced you'd take care of her daughter." "That's impossible," Jonathan said automatically. "I haven't seen Amelia since I was 18. That child can't be." But even as he spoke, doubts crept in. The timing would be right. He and Amelia had been close, more than close, during that last summer before he left for college on a full scholarship. She'd been dating someone else by then, he remembered. Or had she? The memories were fuzzy, deliberately suppressed. "Amelia left something for you," Patricia said, interrupting his thoughts. She retrieved a sealed envelope from her desk drawer. "She said to give you this if you came." Jonathan took the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small photograph. The photo showed a much younger Amelia holding a newborn, her face tired but radiant. He turned it over. Written on the back, "Lena Amelia Vale, 7 pounds 4 ounces. His hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. "My Johnny, if you're reading this, then Lena found you. And I'm gone. I'm sorry for the shock of it all. I wanted to find you so many times over the years, but life has its own plans, doesn't it? Remember that night on the roof of Westbrook? We counted stars, and you promised we'd escape together someday. Remember that drawing you made the next morning? The one where we were grown-ups with our future daughter? You gave it to me the day you left for college. You pressed it into my hands and said, Keep this safe until I come back for you. But you never did. I wrote to you when I found out I was pregnant. I was so scared, Johnny. I wrote 3 letters that summer. Then again when Lena was born. She had your eyes from the very first day. And again each year on her birthday. I sent them to your company once you became famous enough to find. I never heard back. The cold responses I received, they didn't sound like the boy I knew. Eventually, I thought I understood why. Lena is yours, Johnny. She has your eyes, your stubbornness, your brilliance with numbers, even that little crease between your eyebrows when you concentrate. The test results are in the envelope if you need proof. But look at her. Really look, and you'll know. I don't expect anything from you. I've raised her to be strong and independent. But she deserves to know her father. And maybe, just maybe, you deserve to know her too. She's the best of both of us. I forgave you long ago for not coming back. I hope someday you'll forgive yourself. I've loved you all these years, in my way, Amelia. Inside the shelter's small cafeteria, Jonathan sat across from Lena, both with untouched cups of hot chocolate before them. Around them, life at the shelter continued. Volunteers serving dinner, families talking quietly, a routine that had nothing to do with the earthquake happening inside him. Did your mother ever talk about me? He asked finally. Lena nodded. She had a photo of you. The old kind. Black and white. She said you were the smartest boy she ever knew, and that someday you'd change the world. Jonathan felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been hardened for decades. She said you weren't ready to be a dad when I was born. Lena continued matter-of-factly. But that it wasn't because you didn't care. It was because you were scared. Had he been scared? Jonathan couldn't remember. He'd been so focused on escaping his past, on building something unassailable. He'd never looked back, because looking back meant acknowledging what he'd left behind. It struck him as strange, almost cosmic, that he had drawn a daughter named Lena all those years ago, and here she was, exactly as he had imagined her. An 8-year-old girl with his eyes and Amelia's spirit. As if his childhood drawing had been less a wish and more a prophecy, waiting patiently for decades to fulfill itself. I'd like to know more about your mother, he said carefully. And about you. Lena studied him with eyes that were, indeed, unsettlingly like his own. Mom kept all your letters, she offered. My letters. The ones from when you were traveling. She read them to me sometimes. Jonathan felt coldness spread through him. I never sent any letters. Lena frowned. But they had your signature. And your company letterhead. A terrible suspicion began forming in Jonathan's mind. May I see them? Back in the small room Lena shared with 2 other children, she retrieved a battered shoebox from beneath her cot. Inside were dozens of letters, neatly bundled with ribbon. Jonathan selected one at random and felt his blood go cold. They were on his company stationery. They bore a reasonable facsimile of his signature, but he had never written a single word. Dear Amelia, I received your letter about the child. While I understand your situation, I must insist on no further contact. My life has taken a different direction, and acknowledgement of paternity would be problematic for my public image. A check is enclosed to help with expenses, with the understanding that this concludes our association. Regards, Jonathan Vale. Letter after letter, each more coldly dismissive than the last. Some included photocopies of checks, small amounts, insulting really, to someone claiming to have borne his child. These aren't from me, he said, voice shaking with rage. I never wrote these. I never knew about you. Lena's expression didn't change. Mom said you might say that. What else did she say? She said people sometimes get so busy running away from their past that they hire other people to do their remembering for them. The realization hit Jonathan with sickening clarity. Margaret, his longtime executive assistant, the woman who had been with him from the beginning, who had made it her mission to protect him from distractions. How many other pieces of his life had she filtered away? Jonathan pulled out his phone and dialed. When Margaret answered, he spoke with a calm that belied the storm inside him. The letters from Amelia Bedford. How long have you been intercepting them? The pause on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats. Then, I did what was necessary to protect your interests, Jonathan. You were building something important. She would have been a complication. His hand tightened around the phone. 27 years of trust, shattered in an instant. You made decisions about my life, my child, without my knowledge. You weren't ready for a family, Margaret replied, her voice maddeningly reasonable. You're fired. You're fired, he interrupted, his voice quiet but final. Clear your desk tonight. Security will watch you do it. He hung up, feeling something between rage and grief. For all his wealth and power, Someone else had been silently charting the course of his personal life for decades, and it had cost him everything that might have mattered. Jonathan spent the night in a hotel near the shelter, unable to face returning to his empty penthouse. He sat awake until dawn, reading and rereading Amelia's letters, the real ones, not the cruel forgeries sent in his name. Page after page of a life he should have known about. First steps. First words. School plays and fevers and nightmares and laughter. She has your analytical mind, Amelia had written when Lena was 7. Yesterday, she explained to me why rainbows always appear in the same color order. Not because someone told her, but because she worked it out herself. With morning came clarity. Jonathan returned to the shelter with purpose. He found Patricia in her office. "I'd like to speak with a lawyer about establishing guardianship of Lena," he said without preamble. Patricia looked up sharply. "Mr. Vale, while I appreciate your sudden interest, you can't just waltz in and claim a child you've never known. She's my daughter. Biologically, perhaps. But parenthood is more than DNA. Lena has experienced enough disruption. I can't in good conscience." "I understand," Jonathan interrupted. "I'm not suggesting she leave with me today. I'm suggesting we begin a process. Supervised visits. Whatever is appropriate. I've lost 25 years, Miss Patricia. I don't intend to lose any more time." For the first time, Patricia's expression softened slightly. "Why now? Because you feel guilty? Because it's convenient?" Jonathan reached into his coat and pulled out a necklace, a simple silver chain with a small star pendant. "This was my mother's. The only thing I have of hers. I've carried it with me every day of my life." He placed it carefully on the desk. "Nothing about this is convenient. But it's necessary." The next weeks were a study in humility for Jonathan Vale. He, who commanded boardrooms and bit markets to his will, found himself entirely out of his element in the simple task of getting to know his daughter. Their first official visit was at a nearby park. Lena wore the silver star necklace over her coat. "Do you like ice cream?" he asked awkwardly as they walked. "Everyone likes ice cream," she replied, giving him a look that suggested she was reevaluating his intelligence. "What's your favorite subject in school?" "Math. And art." She stopped walking and looked up at him seriously. "Mom said you were good at math, too." "I was." "Am." "She said you counted stars once. That you tried to calculate how many were in the whole universe." The memory hit him with unexpected force. He and Amelia on the roof of Westbrook, a forbidden adventure. Paper and pencil in hand, earnestly trying to extrapolate from the visible sky to the entirety of space. "We decided there were exactly 1,427,000,006," he said, surprised he remembered the number they had so solemnly agreed upon. Lena smiled for the first time since they'd met. It transformed her face entirely. "That seems low." Jonathan found himself smiling back. "Well, we were just kids. Our methodology may have been flawed." Later that week, Jonathan took an unprecedented half-day from work to attend Lena's school play, a chaotic but heartfelt rendition of The Wizard of Oz, in which Lena played a mathematically inclined munchkin. He sat in the back, feeling both conspicuous and invisible among the other parents. After the show, her teacher approached him. "You must be Lena's father," she said. "She mentioned you might come. She's extraordinarily gifted, you know, especially with numbers." "Yes," he said simply. "I'm beginning to see that." Jonathan went searching for the past. Driven by a need to understand what had happened, how he had missed so much, he found himself parking outside the old Westbrook Children's Home one cold January morning. The building looked smaller than he remembered, shabbier. It had been converted to administrative offices years ago, but some of the old staff might still be around. He had to know if anyone remembered Amelia, if anyone knew what had happened after he left. Inside, he found more than he bargained for. The former director, now in his 70s, recognized Jonathan immediately. "The Vale boy," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "Look at you now. We still have your picture on our success wall." Jonathan had no interest in reminiscing. "I need to know about Amelia Bedford." "After I left." The old man's face clouded. "Ah, poor Amelia. She was devastated when you disappeared. Wouldn't eat for days." "I didn't disappear," Jonathan said sharply. "I went to college." She knew that. "But you never answered her letters." The director's confusion seemed genuine. "What letters?" "She wrote to you every week that first year. Through the college. When they started coming back marked, 'Return to Sender,' she finally gave up." Another betrayal. Another deliberate severance of his past. Jonathan had been so determined to reinvent himself at university, to shed any association with his orphan status, that he'd left no forwarding address with Westbrook. All mail from his past had been rejected. When did she leave Westbrook? Jonathan asked. Not long after. When we found out she was pregnant. The old man's eyes were knowing. She was 18 by then, legally an adult. There was nothing we could do to help her. Pregnant. While he'd been excelling in his first year of business courses, determined to prove himself, Amelia had been alone with their child. Was she all right? The director shrugged. She was a fighter, that one. Got her GED. Found work. Checked in occasionally over the years when she was in town. Last I heard, she was taking night classes at the community college. Accounting, I think. Like him. Always like him. In the dusty records room, Jonathan found her file. The official photograph showed 16-year-old Amelia, serious-faced, but with a hint of mischief in her eyes. Clipped to it was a note in faded ink. Departed June 12, 98. Forwarding address, Bedford Women's Shelter, Portland. She'd named their daughter after herself and taken refuge in a shelter with a name that echoed her own. Winter turned to spring. The legal process to establish Jonathan's guardianship moved forward, accelerated by his resources, but still deliberate, as it should be. Lena remained at Harbor Light, but Jonathan visited daily. He helped with homework, learned the names of her friends, discovered her passion for astronomy, a passion that echoed his own childhood obsession. He brought her a telescope for her birthday in March. They set it up on the shelter's roof, Patricia supervising discreetly from a distance. Mom said you'd come back someday, Lena said as they focused on Saturn's rings. Even when she was really sick, she said you just needed time to remember who you were supposed to be. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. Your mother was a remarkable woman. She wasn't mad at you, even about the mean letters. They weren't from me, Lena. I know that now. But she wasn't mad, even when she thought they were. Lena adjusted the telescope slightly. She said everyone has their own path, and sometimes paths that are supposed to meet get separated for a while. Out of the mouths of children, Jonathan thought of all the choices that had led him here, the deliberate forgetting, the single-minded pursuit of success, the emptiness he'd never acknowledged. I'd like to tell you about her, Lena said suddenly. About Mom. So you don't miss all of her. And so, under a canopy of stars, his daughter told him stories of the woman he had once loved and lost. Of Amelia's laugh, her terrible cooking, her habit of singing off-key to the radio, her determination to give Lena everything she needed, even when resources were scarce. For the first time in decades, Jonathan Vale wept openly, there on a shelter rooftop, mourning what he had missed and celebrating what he had found. 1 year later, Harbor Light Shelter had a new wing. Built in honor of a woman named Amelia Bedford, it provided transitional housing for single parents and their children, along with educational resources and childcare. The dedication plaque read simply, "For A.B., who always found her way home." Jonathan's life had been transformed. The glass tower downtown still bore his name, but he spent less time there now. His executive team had been restructured. No one remained who had been complicit in hiding Amelia's attempts to reach him. The Vale Foundation had a new mission, focused on supporting family reunification and educational opportunities for children in the foster system. And most importantly, the penthouse that had once been a monument to solitude now echoed with the sounds of life. Lena's room was painted deep blue and covered in glow-in-the-dark stars. Her books and projects spilled into the living spaces. Her laughter filled corners that had never known joy. It hadn't been easy. There had been tantrums and tears, misunderstandings and missteps. Lena grieved her mother fiercely. Jonathan struggled to learn patience, to understand that not all problems could be solved with money or efficiency, but they were finding their way. On this particular evening, they sat at the kitchen table. Lena worked on a school project while Jonathan reviewed reports nearby, close enough to help if needed, but giving her space to work independently. She held up a paper and giggled. "This one's me and you today, not someday." Jonathan looked at the drawing. A tall man and a smiling girl stood before what was unmistakably his building downtown. But in this version, the cold glass tower was surrounded by trees and flowers. Life breaking through the sterility. "It's perfect," he said softly. Later, after Lena was asleep, Jonathan sat in his office looking at the original drawing, the one that had brought them together. He'd had it professionally preserved and framed. Me and my future daughter, Lena. Sometimes, he reflected, the universe has a longer memory than we do. Sometimes the promises we forget as children are the ones that come back to save us as adults. If this story touched you, tap the like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in love, memory, and hope. Because second chances aren't just plot devices and stories. They're all around us, waiting to be recognized. And sometimes, the life you were meant to live has been waiting patiently for you to find your way back to it. What promise from your past might be trying to find its way back to you? Leave a comment below. I read every single one.